Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today is episode number 24. I'm your host, Roman Zelechenko. I'm a former immigration lawyer, or I guess an immigration lawyer. Once a lawyer, you're always a lawyer. And now an immigration tech startup founder. I'm the founder of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B compliance, and also GMI Rocket, which brings you this show. And I'm super excited for my guest today. It is the middle of December 2020. It is the last episode of 2020. So I'm just excited to cap off the show this year with an amazing guest. On today, we have Sophie Alcorn, a fellow immigration lawyer who's also very tech savvy, super involved in the tech world, and is, in my opinion, a marketing machine. And we'll talk all about that. We'll talk about how Sophie has built her law firm, how she's all over the place in terms of articles and podcasts and webinars and you name it, and everything that Sophie has going for her. So without any further ado, Sophie, thank you so much for joining and for being here, spending your time.
Hi, Roman. Thank you so much. It's a total pleasure. I've loved the opportunity to collaborate with you over the years on lots of different projects and connections. So, and I would, you're a recovering immigration lawyer,
yeah.
Right?
Well, you know what? I really loved being a lawyer. When I decided to leave the law, this is not about me. This conversation is not about me. But when I decided to leave the law, I was actually interviewing for a tech job and for a lawyer job, and I just went for the tech side because I wanted to really focus on that. But I love it, and I miss it. So yeah, I should probably just say an immigration lawyer. But anyway.
Because I burned out, I quit being an immigration lawyer for like 4 or 5 years. And I had kids as my excuse to leave the profession that I thought I was committed to. And I had compassion fatigue and didn't even know that was a thing. So wow. I get it. I totally get it.
Especially for an industry like immigration. Yeah, I mean, compassion is what you really need to be good, to be successful.
And compassion fatigue is a real thing. It's something that doctors and social workers learn about in their educations, but it's not part of any law school curriculum. So if there's any immigration lawyers out there listening to this and you're feeling a little burned out from the last 4 years, it's a thing. There's tools, you can get help. It's a real thing, but basically like client trauma re-traumatizes the immigration practitioner who's trying to give everything in this crazy field. So yeah, I get it.
and I would imagine that's really acute in the sort of asylum and humanitarian context, but probably especially now across the board. I mean, people are just struggling.
Well, I thought coming back into it that if I founded a law firm focused on technology professionals and overachievers, I wouldn't have to deal with this. Right. But that brings us all like a whole other type of neuroses. So
well, we'll get to that. I think that is a really interesting topic. And before we jump in, just for folks watching, please give us some shout outs. I know Sophie has a lot of fans. And so if anyone here is actually watching live, shout yourself out in the comments, ask questions as we go along. I'd love to, include everybody in the conversation. So, Sophie, like you said, we've sort of been on a bunch of panels together, and it's been really awesome to kind of get to know you through that. But when you get on a panel with somebody, you might have a minute or two. You don't say, "Hey, tell me everything about your life," right? So it's really, I think, exciting for me to learn about you. So we were chatting before we went live, and you said you're from Southern Cal. You grew up in Southern California, in the LA area.
Yeah, in the city of Mission Viejo in Orange County, kind of south of Disneyland, between LA and San Diego, right near the Laguna Niguel Service Center for USCIS.
Oh, interesting. Maybe something happened that you don't remember as a kid, and you're like, "That's the thing."
Well, my dad was an immigration lawyer, and my mom was his client from Germany. So, back in the day, California didn't have ethics rules about relationships with your clients and past clients. And I'm very grateful because I would not be around if we had those rules back then. So,
yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. You hear a lot of stories about people who go into immigration through their sort of personal experience, but this is a whole new twist on that.
It's in my blood.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I'm a New Yorker, and I think New York, LA is like the rivals / everyone from each city loves the other city. So, what was it like, I guess, for you growing up in LA?
I had a very idyllic young childhood. It was very suburban and beautiful, and my dad would go to his office in his suit and go help clients and save the world, and maybe drive to LA for a deportation trial. And my mom stayed home with us, and I loved hearing all of my dad's stories about his clients. And it was normal to have family dinners with guests from Vietnam or go over to our friend's house from India. So it was very international in a way. And when I was 7, my parents started putting me on airplanes to go visit relatives by myself. So it started out with my grandma in Florida. And then when I was 9, I guess I decided I wanted to go live with my grandparents in Germany and go to school and spend fourth grade in my own German immersion experience. So I flew to Germany by myself when I was 9 and spent 6 months there. And I remember Christmas time sitting around the table. We didn't speak German in my household growing up because my mom really liked being in one language, thinking, sleeping, dreaming, talking in one language. So like when my German grandma would come and we would go to the grocery store, my mom would ask the supermarket kid, like, "Wo ist das Brot?" And I'd be like, "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so embarrassed. You're speaking German. Speak English. We're in America." Right. So didn't really learn German growing up, but was in Germany as a kid. And I just remember that light bulb moment of sitting around my grandparents' table one morning, Sunday, and in December, a couple months after I arrived in Germany. And I realized they were talking about the sales and the coupons in the Sunday newspaper and what they were going to go buy when they went to the grocery store. And I just realized I could understand everything they were saying, and it was in German. And that was amazing early.
And you picked that up through like your few months, already kind of living in Germany?
Yeah, and just sitting quietly in the school every day when everybody was speaking in German, and just practicing German cursive, which was different than American cursive. And I don't know, somehow letting it percolate. Yeah.
That's incredible. What was it? And first of all, so cool that your parents were kind of like, yeah, of course, go. Yeah. I think every kid's like a crazy dream. Let me go live somewhere else as a 4th grader. And most parents would be like, no, just go back to your homework. What was that like? Did kids know, was it an international school or was it kind of local?
No, it was just their little village. There were about 60 kids in the 5 grades, and the 4th grade had 12 students. I was the 13th, and I would just walk to school with my little German backpack every day and play with the kids in the town. Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. Did kids like ever tease you or anything because you're from somewhere else, or were they pretty nice about it?
No, it was the opposite. They all wanted to be my friend. It was cool. It was really nice. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You hear so much about just like bullying, right? And it's so cool that you were very different, but in a way that was really exciting to them. Wow. So you lived there. So you were 4th grade, and then I'm assuming you came back, and then did you attend high school back in the States?
Yeah. And then I finished like my adolescence in Orange County before moving to Northern California.
Got it. Yeah. Got it. So you moved, and this whole time when you were born, your father was already practicing immigration law, right?
So I remember going to his office, and he would feed me sugar cubes because he didn't have any. He just had coffee and like boxes of sugar cubes and powder creamer. So it was this huge treat because we got to eat like 5 sugar cubes when we were waiting around at his office for something. And and I remember helping him, check the voicemail on the phone when he got the first answering machine, and I got to send the fax to USCIS and put in the number in the fax machine, and then in the olden days, like call the bank to see his credit card balance and type in the numbers. So he put me to work at a young age.
That's so funny. It's so cool. Do you remember like at that age, maybe, I don't know how old or how young, whether you thought to yourself, oh, I want to do this, or I want to work here, or like I want to keep helping, or was it just like a fun thing?
It was just super fun. And he always told me, Sophie, the world is your oyster. You're a creative problem solver. Don't copy me. Do whatever you want. The world's big. Follow your heart. So he tried to talk me out of it for a long time. And then I thought he was doing reverse psychology on me, and I fought him, and I was going to do it anyway.
Wow. That's so funny. So you moved up to Northern California. You went to Stanford for undergrad. Did you at that time say I want to go to law school already, or were you just kind of like, college is a great school, you were just exploring?
Yeah. So a beautiful thing about Stanford was that they don't make you declare a major to go there, or even for the first 2 years. You can shop any class you want. I thought I wanted to be a linguistics major. Then I thought I wanted to be an anthropology major. And then, I think I mentally declared like 10 majors. I really like languages. So I ended up studying abroad I was supposed to go to Germany, but then I got detoured and I ended up in Moscow and then Italy. And then I wasn't a German major anymore. And then I took this Old Norse class that I loved. Basically, my senior year was spent taking freshman classes in economics to try to graduate on time, when I finally realized that international relations would be the only thing I could get 60 units in to get my bachelor's degree in 4 years, because I had been having so much fun. I had a radio show and traveling, and I just loved exploring so many things. It was amazing.
That's so cool. That's so fun. And international relations is so relevant, of course, to the immigration space too.
Yeah.
I wanted to, we just have a couple comments here. So we have Electra Yao saying, great guest. She says, not sure if you can see me, but Sophie, you are so inspirational and I'm excited to learn about your career.
Thank you so much, Electra.
Yeah. Thank you, Electra. And she says, I work closely with artists and creative professionals, but I love O1As too. Haha. Thank you, Electra. And then we also have Richard Allman from YouTube saying, hi, Richard and Sophie. It's Richard from Recruiters Network. Excited to hear about you and your views. Me too.
Hi, Richard.
Awesome. Thank you. Keep throwing out some comments, ask questions, of course, as we go along. So you graduated with an international studies as an international.
Yeah, and I spent my senior year being like, oh crap, I'm supposed to make money now.
Right.
What? And I thought about taking the Foreign Service exam. I wanted to be a diplomat. And I was like, well, if I have a law degree, I'll probably rise up through the State Department faster. So maybe I'll just go to law school, because you can do anything with a law degree. So I just scrambled to take the LSAT and apply to law school my senior year. And then I went straight to law school. My dad was like, look, just get an advanced degree. If you don't do it now, life will get you sidetracked and you'll never do it. So if you know you want to do it, just do it now. Like, okay.
Did you, what kind of brought you to, because you went to WashU Law School. Yeah. What brought you there?
Yeah. They have an amazing clinical education program. And I really wanted to be like down and dirty in the trenches with clients and getting hands-on experiences of doing legal work. And they have one of the top programs for that. And I really made the most of it. It was incredible. I spent way more time getting to help people than actually having to take class in law school, which I loved.
Yeah, I was kind of the same in law school. I think studying was the last of my worries. I was more interested in the clinics and the groups and just being, not sitting behind a book, but being in front of people. Because I was doing a little bit of research and I saw that you had a bunch of really cool internships, and your last one during your 3L year was with EOIR. Did you, again, and this is all in the context and the background of you grew up sort of in the world of an immigration law firm. Did you leverage that at all to get did you kind of know buzzwords? I mean, or was it just like a really good government, internship?
So I loved studying abroad in college. So I was like, ooh, what's the equivalent in law school? It's going to Washington, D.C. and having this cultural experience in government. I actually started off in a congressperson's office, and I had a really challenging experience. So I only lasted in that position for about 4 weeks.
Wow.
And I thought I would have to quit and go back to St. Louis and take the semester off and delay my graduation and miss the bar exam. But I leveraged law school networks and figured out that the Department of Justice, Executive Office of Immigration Review had interns, and I pleaded my case, and there was a really lovely internship director there under the Obama administration, and she got my cover letter and she took pity on me, and I told her, like, I've read the whole Ninth Circuit outline of immigration law and I'm practicing and I'm ready. And then meanwhile, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to spend my semester deporting people. Crap, but at least I'll graduate law school on time, and it'll probably be a good idea to figure out what it's like in government, and Congress isn't working out, so okay, let's at least get more information to figure out the other side.
Yep.
It was crazy depressing, because the types of cases that they assigned free, unpaid intern law students to were the thousands of shoddily written briefs by hacks and paralegals who just use template boilerplate for people with no legal basis, but a lot of really poor Chinese asylum seekers and immigrants who are undocumented from Mexico. Like, the people hadn't read their cases. There was ineffective assistance of counsel all over the place, unauthorized practice of law. It was so easy to defeat those legal briefs, and it just shocked me to see the volume of people who had no chance because there was nobody to help them. So I learned it was very eye-opening.
Wow. So and from that government sort of perspective, was the thought these cases are easy, we'll give them to the intern because it's a no-brainer that there's no
intern can't screw this up. Let the intern write the opposing brief. We'll just sign off on it. There's no way that this person will ever win. They don't have a leg to stand on.
Wow. And then, of course, what that really means is, and what that translates to, is that person gets removed essentially from the U.S., I guess.
Yeah, because at the Ninth Circuit, if the Ninth Circuit denies you, the Supreme Court's probably not going to take that case. So it's basically the last stop.
When I was in law school, I had an internship with the Eastern District of New York. I was in Brooklyn, right across the street from my school, Brooklyn Law School, and I was working with the immigration unit. The U.S. Attorney's Office.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah, Eastern,
yeah.
And so we, immigration unit, and there it was similar, right? It was like we were sort of representing the government on a lot of deportation proceedings or removal proceedings, and it was one of those things where, like, it's like you talking to a criminal lawyer, and it's like, quote unquote, how do you defend this sort of party? Right. But from this perspective, it was like, well, I actually have, as the U.S. attorney or assistant U.S. attorney, he said, I have the power to actually look into these cases and decide not to remove them. And that's something that no private attorney can do. And so I thought that was really powerful. And to your point, to see how things work in the government, even through just an internship, gives you a ton of insight, right, when you go into the private practice side.
Right. And I was able to leverage that experience in my contacts later when I started practicing in California, and I did removal defense and appeals as part of my practice. We had a client from the Ninth Circuit. He really had no legal leg to stand on, but his wife, they had like 4 U.S. citizen kids, and his wife had multiple types of cancer, and I was able to negotiate with DOJ to use prosecutorial discretion and drop the removal proceedings. So we didn't win for like legal, I didn't create a new law or a new precedent, but he got to stay, and that was really powerful. And that's the sort of thing that was possible during the Obama administration. So I'm hopeful that there might be days like that ahead for people.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. That's super powerful. And also goes to show you what a really good clinical experience can actually do, right, in law school. So you graduated law school, and I suppose you came back to California, and you actually ended up joining your father's practice. Is that right?
Yeah, I graduated in May. I moved to California with my then fiance. I studied for the bar exam. I took the bar exam in July. We had our wedding in August, and I started working in September, and I got sworn in December.
Wow.
And that was my year. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy year. Yeah.
That's crazy. Did you have to interview for the job?
No. It was more like, Dad, It's 2008. There's a financial crisis. I spent all my time applying to judicial clerkships that I'm too political for, and they don't want me because I'm too like fiery and I can't just be a perfectionist legal scholar grinder.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't apply to all those social justice fellowships that I really wanted. And the IP firm is not offering me a job. And what am I supposed to do? Can I do immigration law? And my dad, he had to think about it a lot because I know he was really thrilled at the idea of working together with me, but he also wanted to make sure that, that I was doing the right thing for me and I was doing something that I was actually interested in. And I had spent several years telling him, I'm not going to copy you. I'm going to do my own thing. And there I was. But the pattern I found was that, with my U.S. Attorney's experience and ACLU and Department of Justice and Congress and employment law and appellate law and all these things that I had tried, I thought eventually I wanted to do impact litigation because I wanted to change the law at a broader scale. But I almost dropped out of law school when I broke my leg to become a Unitarian minister. Like I had a whole journey there. But ultimately, I decided that I needed to be in the trenches because I wanted to work with people before I tried to tackle systemic change. And I wanted to do something that was uplifting, where instead of helping people go from like -10 to maybe 0, I wanted to help people go from like -10 to 20. And immigration law felt more like that than criminal law or family law.
It also touches on a lot of different things, right? Let's say for employment immigration, you do have, you could have a criminal issue at the same time as an employment law issue. And maybe there's nowadays, right, there's litigation that goes into it. I mean, really kind of puts a lot of those things into practice. What was it like working at the, once you started there, what was it like? Was it kind of one of those things where like you're a student and your parent is the teacher, and so either they're really hard on you so that the other kids don't think, like, was there any of that, or was it just like you go to work and yes, it's your dad?
My dad was a JAG in the Marine Corps. He was very intense, and I didn't want to benefit from nepotism. He wanted me to rise into my own, professional maturity. And it stressed both of us out. So like I was afraid to ask the secretaries or paralegals for help. And I didn't understand the dynamics of a business at that point. So I was probably wasting a ton of his money by doing my own photocopying, but I didn't want anybody to think that I was, special. And I was really scared. He threw me into the deep end with employment visas, green cards, adjustment interviews, master calendar hearings and removal defense, cancellation of removal trial, all sorts of weird like FBI issues for Iranian folks in Orange County. And I was scared out of my mind. And I remember a few months in crying to him, like, Dad, how do you know when good enough is good enough? I'm sending out these cases, but I'm not going to know for a year if they're getting approved or not. Like, what if I'm doing a horrible job? How do you know? And I was crying. And he said, if you want an easy job, go work for the government. Go be an AUSA or something. You don't have to work here. I was like, fine, I'll never cry again.
Wow. Tough love.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, I guess you don't know, right? You don't know. There's no way for you to go home and say that was perfect. I'm good.
No, and I had this brief that I wrote to the Board of Immigration Appeals for a guy who was seeking asylum from, a country in West Africa. And he had come to us after the previous attorney had lost his trial and he had been ordered deported. And I wrote a brief and I followed every rule I learned in law school, legal writing, conclusion, rule analysis, conclusion, the whole thing. I cited everything perfectly. It was like 25 pages long. And the FedEx deadline was 1 p.m. and my dad finished reviewing it at noon. And he came and he said, Soph, come here. I was like, okay. And he's like, sit down. I was like, okay. He said, this is the worst brief I have ever read in my life, but it's too late and there's nothing we can do about it. And we have to send it out right now or else we're going to miss the deadline.
Wow.
Like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then 13 months later, I won the case.
Wow.
Based on that brief, the government didn't contest it, and the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is really hard to win at, ruled in favor of my client, but I thought I had committed malpractice. How do you know?
That's crazy. Did he ever give you feedback on like why, after the fact, on what he thought wasn't great about it?
Because he thought it was like a robot regurgitation, and it didn't have a story. It wasn't compelling. There was no movement. It wasn't human. Mm-hmm. It was just this very rigid legal analysis.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting because that insight is sort of, maybe foreshadowing a little bit, but I think that insight, at least from my perspective, is what separates good marketing from not good marketing in the immigration space. And I think in the legal space, right? Like that ability to tell stories. And it's funny because as lawyers, we recognize that in a brief, you have to tell a story, right?
Yeah,
like
all sorts of writing workshops for lawyers about compelling storytelling and the art of legal persuasion. But then we often suck at it. We don't translate it to marketing.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, to me, that's what's so fascinating. We all have this sort of innate skill and understanding that story is so important. But maybe it's this thing of like not wanting to talk about yourself or boast, but we will tell our client's story, like it's some award-winning soliloquy. But then when it comes to telling our story of our own firm or our own business or our own practice, it's very much like, I practice in business immigration for 10 years and like tell the story, right? So anyway, I just think that's an interesting insight.
Well, I think that's one of the ways that law school messes up our thinking, or this idea of thinking like a lawyer. We're not at eye level. We're servants, and our job is to elevate our client, and we're supposed to be the invisible hero. And law school just breaks you down so much. It's really hard to reconstitute your identity afterwards. It takes effort.
And it drills certain things into your head. I wanted to, there's a comment here from Steven. It says, love the stories from childhood and spent time in rural Germany. Did someone say envy? Compassion fatigue says a lot about how you're deeply invested in your work. So Stephen is in-house immigration. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. And yeah, agreed. I mean, compassion fatigue is, as you said, Sophie, it's very real, especially in the industry, but maybe not often talked about. I haven't really heard that term very much. Maybe we should start bringing that term out more.
I think we should.
So you practiced at the firm for, I guess I read like 6 years or so.
Well, that's like generous. It was more like 2, and then I was advising when I was really a stay-at-home mom.
Got it. Okay, so that's when you decided, okay, I'm going to be kind of really focusing more on myself and my family. Did you? If you can share about that, did you kind of say, I don't want to do this anymore, or was it because you're having kids and you just wanted more time at home?
It's a great question. It's a little embarrassing, but I'm going to share it because I think it's important for people to be able to talk about this sort of a thing and just be real. I was really depressed, but didn't know it. Mm-hmm. And the compassion fatigue was really bad, and like PTSD and other things. I loved and valued my dad's opinion so much, and he was very much like us. I love him, but he was very judgmental stickler that like immigration law is the only true calling. It's like walking the path of Jesus, and other things can't measure up. So I didn't want to do anything less because I didn't want to disappoint him, that I was turning my back or closing off my heart to this, God's work. And I certainly couldn't go work for another law firm because that would be even worse than death. And I didn't really know how to have a way out. And so I was newly married, and people said that having kids was one of the most wonderful things in life. And I could see how much my dad was proud of me and how much he loved me. And I was like, well, I'm looking for meaning and purpose in my life. So I'll start having kids. And then I'll tell my dad that I should go be a stay-at-home mom, because that was the privilege that I got to have growing up with. And, you know, he told me that you can't outsource the love for your children to anybody else, and I wouldn't want to mess them up. And, you know, kids are more important than immigration law. So I had this whole logic constructed to justify it all. But there was an intermediate step where we also moved to Spain when my son was 10 months old to try to do Spanish immersion. And I was justifying that this was, you know, good for my career. But that actually, I just needed the space to think more clearly about what I wanted. And from there, my ex-husband and I decided to not go back to LA, but to move to the San Francisco Bay Area, where we had met at Stanford, for him to pursue a career as a software engineer at a tech company, so that we could have the little house with the white picket fence and I could be a stay-at-home mom. We could keep having kids. So that was, that's how I came back to the Bay Area.
Yeah, that's quite how long were you living in Spain for?
About 5 months.
5 months.
It was really hard. It was really isolating. Totally different than the other experiences in, you know, with family in Germany or as a student in Moscow and Florence, because, you know, we went to Spain as adults without a job offer and without family, and it's really hard. And when we chose Sevilla, which is a more sort of provincial in a way, because we thought we would have more Spanish exposure and immersion possibility there, but really it was like, oh, you know, why do we want to talk to those Americans who are just passing through? I went to kindergarten with you and our grandmas were friends 100 years ago. Like, so it was very hard to make connections, and I was just very, very isolated with my now add postpartum depression to the list of things that I was just, you know, under the weight of. So yeah, we eventually came back and moved near San Francisco.
How old was that was your first child?
Yeah, he was less than a year old.
Oh, okay. Got it. So your thinking was to stay there for a handful of years so like he can kind of come to be in this.
Yeah, we were open to that. And I have a German passport through my mom, so we were able to, you know, apply for residence in Spain.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting too, even that small tidbit, right? As an immigration attorney, you recognize the importance of having that sort of familial connection to EU, right? To be able to just do that is very cool. Wow. So then you moved back.
But it gives me so much respect for my clients, right? Because it's freaking hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. So yeah, especially if you're just going for a dream, right? Like going for family, going because you're in love, going because somebody's offering you a bunch of money. It's easier to make those adjustments because you're like, okay, I'm being rewarded for this. But you're like, I have a dream. Sometimes there's a slow feedback loop on those dreams.
And you know, the American dream is powerful. And I think people do try to come here for a dream, I suppose, right? I mean, even folks who come here on an F1 visa or even a J1 to study, that's part of the dream, right? That's sort of the beginning stages of the dream, because they're not being compensated. In fact, they're paying a ton of money to you know, to study here. Yeah. So then you moved back to San Francisco, and I guess you said you were working as like a sort of counsel or that type, you know, sort of like maybe advising, maybe not.
I would like answer questions on Avo for my dad's firm sometimes.
Yeah. Well, listen, you stay sharp that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I guess, you know, and this is something that we chatted about a little bit earlier, but I guess in 2014, your dad actually died.
Yeah. He reemerged into non-physical. Yeah. He died. It was we just had the 6-year anniversary of that, and it still shaped me. It shapes me to this day. It was very traumatic and sad, and I was in deep grief. It was a very big shock. He had remarried, and I have a small sibling, and it was like a trick-or-treating accident involving, a car. And so I just got, like, I called my dad that afternoon to wish him a happy Halloween. It was always his favorite holiday. I have all these pictures of him carving pumpkins over the years. And I got a middle of the night phone call saying, there's been a horrible accident, Sophie. And your family, your siblings in the hospital, and your dad died. And I had just this flurry of thoughts and feelings, disbelief, shock, because one of the last times I had seen him a couple of weeks before, I was saying, Dad, I've gotten help for my depression. I'm finally making progress. I'm thinking about returning to the workforce. Maybe I could work with you again. I know we were arguing about how I wanted you to disinherit me because I thought that if something happened to you, I wouldn't be capable of running your law firm, and I didn't want to screw over all your clients. But maybe I could like start writing briefs for lawyers in the background from my house while I'm taking care of my kids, something like that. And my dad was like, yeah, anything's possible. So that was the last time I had seen him. And this has been an ongoing conversation for us for some time. So the next morning after I got this call, put the kids in the car, like a baby and a 3-year-old, and did should be 6-hour drive, and it took like 12 hours to get down there. And it was, just something that nobody saw coming. And my dad was so beloved. And they read the will, and it turns out he had listened to me when I was fighting with him, and he had done as I said and made alternative plans for his law firm. And so another attorney has taken on that mantle. But I had realized in that I was ready to move down there, put my kids in full-time daycare, take over his firm, do all the things. And they just said, you don't need to do that, Sophie. Go, you can do your own thing.
How did that feel? Because I feel like I imagine you're driving down thinking, I mean, obviously so many.
Oh yeah. It's like, oh, my ex is going to transfer to Google Irvine. He's going to switch to that other group that does that other thing down there. This is the neighborhood where we're going to rent a house. Okay. There's the daycare. My kids are going to scream for 5 weeks, but I'll do it because we have to. Mm-hmm. Like, we can move on this date. I'm very analytical, so yeah. I had it all mapped out right away. And so it was, it started a very, very, like, I was already in a very challenging time in my life, because after I had my 2 kids, I told you about like the postpartum depression, and before that, the compassion fatigue. And all of that kind of had its inception from like even earlier Me Too experiences that I had gone through. So there's all of these like compounding layers. And I tried so hard since Stanford to just, my dad always said, do the right thing. And I tried to understand what that meant. And when I was super depressed and cut off from myself, the only definition I could come up with for that was, okay, do the things that people say make you happy, like follow the rules, lead a good life, be a good citizen, help people, like do your best, strive, get achievements, use your powers to help people. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Stanford, I'll go straight to law school, I'll pass the bar exam the first time, I'll get married, I'll have kids. But I did all of that, and I was more depressed than ever. And so that year that my dad died, 2014, that was sort of like I don't want to say a bad word, The things that hit the fan year, and everything fell apart, and I was a mess. I was so depressed. I could barely get out of bed some days. I had no identity. My world had become so small. I was freaking out about my toddlers with shovels. Like, my kid hit somebody in the park. The mom chewed me out, and I was crying at the library researching treatises on appropriate childhood development, trying to make a legal outline to understand child psychology to figure out if my child was normal or not. Like, I had too much time on my hands, and I was so unhappy. And then, my dad died unexpectedly, and I didn't inherit his law firm, and that was devastating. And then my marriage fell apart. So it all happened. And I was like, oh crap, I'm a stay-at-home mom in one of the most expensive places in the world. And I have no professional network. I haven't worked in years. I feel like a total imposter. Nobody will ever trust me. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I could go get a job at another law firm, but why would they even hire me? And maybe if I can just convince an immigrant who really desperately needs a green card at a coffee shop that I could be their lawyer, maybe I could just get one case here and there at a time. So that was my thinking for starting my law firm.
Wow. And that's how it happened?
I was like barefoot in the kitchen washing sweet potato mush on plastic crap, looking out my window in Mountain View. There's like one tall building in Mountain View, and I was like, oh, that's where 500 startups is. This tech world is so close, but so far away. I wish I could be a tech entrepreneur, but I don't know anybody, and nobody will trust me, and I don't know how to code, and I have no skills. And it's like, okay, no, Sophie, you have some skills. Maybe you can get into the tech world if you help immigrants who are in the tech world, and then you can learn from them about how to start businesses, which they're doing, and then you can do it and you can help them. So that's why I didn't go to coding school, like coding boot camp.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's crazy how life works sometimes. Yeah. I mean, all of these things happen at the same time together. And like that really, I guess, just like pushes you over the edge, I suppose.
I had no choice.
Yeah.
I had no choice but to succeed. And I remember, so I bootstrapped my law firm. There were no investors, right? Yeah. I had no capital. I had no roadmap. I had no plan. I took one step at a time as it felt right, making really scary decisions like, do I get a 3-year lease on a photocopier? Will I still have an office in 3 years? If I don't, where will I put the photocopier? Will it be in my house, in my hallway? Like this is the sort of absurd thinking that I was going through because I just didn't know what I was doing. And there were many dark nights of like, oh crap, now I have 3 employees, but now I filed for divorce and I have like no income this month, and how am I going to make payroll? Well, when my dad died, I got like $13,000 from the car insurance, and that's what I got. So I guess instead of using that to take care of myself through my divorce, I'm going to use it to pay payroll so I can keep my law firm going for the next month or two. Like it was scary.
Those are tough decisions. And those are also decisions you don't ever think about when you don't run your own business, or especially your own practice. To your point about what law school does and does not prepare you for, you can be probably pretty crippled by making a decision about something as small as a photocopier at a time when like it's stressful to not have someone else to rely on to make even those little decisions. I can imagine being really stressful.
And thinking like a lawyer means imagining every worst case scenario possible. Right. It's not, you have to like take that hat off when you want to be your business decision maker, entrepreneur hat. Yeah. They're very different hats.
Yeah. And this was in you launched your firm, if we can say that, right? Because you made this decision, I guess, in 2014. You were backed up.
Yeah, I think the incorporation for my firm happened in fall of 2015, about a year later. I'd gone to a design thinking class at Stanford continuing education, and it was this like 2 or 3 weekend workshop called Building a Career of Meaning and Impact. And the professor is wonderful. I still keep in touch with her. The class still exists if anybody wants to take it, but it's like, do design thinking and mini experiments and apply it to your life and figure out what your next career move is going to be. And just do time-bound, short-term tests to get data, iterate, incorporate into that experience into your new outlook, and then try the next thing. And this is where I was like, oh my God, if I become a lawyer, I'm going to have to get my suits out of my closet from when I was young and hot before I had kids and before I got fat. And I'm going to have to realize that none of those fit me anymore. I don't want to do that. And then I'm going to have to take CLEs. Like, that's where it started. But I remember that somebody, her name was Begonia from South America. And she's like, Sophie, you're an immigration lawyer. That's amazing. And I was like, I don't feel like an immigration lawyer. She's like, just fake it till you make it. And so that was my mantra. I was like, oh no, fake it till I make it. And then later I realized it should actually be, fake it till you believe it, because you are it. And, I was just the one that needed convincing. But that project led to somebody in the East Bay being like, we have an Indian software consulting company and we want to do 40 H-1Bs in the next 3 weeks to make it into the lottery for our Indian parent company. Can you do that? I was like, sure, it's a mini experiment. I'm all motivated now. Wow. And so I went to their office and pulled all-nighters trying to get this ready. And I think I made I charged them something insane, like $200 a pop. So I made peanuts, but I was so happy at the end that somebody had paid me. When you're done, you either win or you lose. There's clarity. People are grateful. It was so different than being a housewife and a mom to toddlers. This is incredible. I love this. And so my ex was like, you should get the URL mountainviewimmigrationlawyer.com. And my friend who is a designer was like, Sophie, you got to think bigger. Like, you need a brand. What's your brand? I was like, I don't know. What is a brand? I have no idea. What's the difference between advertising and marketing? I'm like Googling, like, what is the difference? Like, I have no idea. But we figured it out, just like one little step at a time.
Was that your first kind of big client?
Yeah. I mean, it was my first client in years. And then I spent a bunch of time before I really defined the practice of just doing a bunch of pro bono work, like violence against women cases. And I'm actually going to New Jersey in a few weeks for the final trial of a guy who I got undeported. So he gets his second chance at asylum. So I'm going to do his trial pretty soon.
Wow.
And I needed these little things to boost my confidence. And then, in the act of service, I could get out of my head and my own depression and insecurities and just find pleasure in something and service to somebody. And then I realized that the divorce was actually, looming, and I needed to get my act together and start making money. So then I got a lot more on it about marketing and things like that.
So I want to now dive into this a little bit. We had a couple of comments here. Andrew Wilson says, you're very strong and resilient to come through the other side. Really impressive what you've built. I couldn't agree more. And I think when we were, Andrew also commented, those running a firm are brave entrepreneurs. I agree. They don't teach you these skills in law school. They really don't. And especially in the face of adversity, they might teach you, you might have some inkling of what to do when everything looks wonderful, but what do you actually do? How do you make decisions when things are challenging? And I think, so Ilya Brodsky here from Canada says, love the early customer excitement. I mean, obviously this is like your early customer of your own firm, finally, right? You've already had customers, if you will, in your previous experience, from your father's firm and before that. But yeah, to see that, to like, I don't care how little it takes and how many nights of sleep I lose, that excitement, you kind of can't get that back, I think, as you grow.
It was really fun.
Now, I'm interested because given where you are now, you've gone through all of this, you've gone through more difficulty, I think, than most people do in a lifetime, honestly. You know what I mean? And this is while you have kids and you're dealing with, there's just so much, and the overwhelm is massive, but of course also forces you to make moves. You have to, right? What do you think, where did you start realizing that I have to really take this into overdrive? I can't just sit there and go to a conference once in a while and get a client here and there. Like, I have to build up a brand for myself to really maybe, if you will, make up for all the time that you weren't spending, maybe more slowly building up that firm brand. How did you do that? Because I think people look at you now, and we haven't talked about this, but you're a regular columnist on TechCrunch. You were sitting in Palo Alto looking at the one skyscraper thinking, oh, those startups are out of reach. And now those startups are reaching out to you on a daily basis, but that, and not in a very long period of time. And I think people look at that and think to themselves, oh yeah, of course, Sophie, that's Sophie. But the interesting part of it is like, well, how did you get there? What was that moment where you're like, I've got to get my shit together from a marketing standpoint? And then what did you do going forward?
Yeah, I went to a conference about law firm management, and it was like a coaching mindset mastermind. Who's that guy? Napoleon Hill sort of a thing. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, what's your financial goal? And I said, oh, I want to make X. And then it was like, well, why? And they wanted you to write like, oh, well, private school is this much and my yacht is this much. But I chose a really low number, relatively speaking. But then they said, why? And I was just like, oh, shit. Oh, shoot. Like, that's how much my, X makes. And I was like, why do you care, Sophie? It's not a competition. It doesn't matter if you make more or less. And it's like, no, that's so you can continue to live in the same way after you get divorced. And I was like, I don't want to do that. But then it was like, oh my God, I spent so many decades not following my heart, and I couldn't bear to do that anymore. And I went to done so many things. I went on a spiritual retreat in India in the jungle. I did a panchakarma with all this like purging and Ayurvedic medicine. And I was meditating on the beach and healing my Me Too trauma and doing all of these things. And I actually met this wonderful German researcher there who's a professor of emotion theory. And now I've founded a decision-making startup with him to help bring this new field of digitized decision-making management to companies. But when I was sitting on the beach with him in India, like 4 or 5 years ago, and we were talking, and I was, sharing my woe is me, I don't know what to do with my life situation. He said, you have to decide. You have to decide. And it was like, oh my God, I have to learn how to make decisions. And so what I've learned from this is that making decisions, like there's actually a way to make there is such a thing as a good decision. Like a good decision is actionable, it's clear. You have a commitment. If it's a group, it's jointly supported. There's all of these elements. So there is a such thing as a good decision. But I also learned that it's not enough to use cognitive logic and rationality to make decisions. You have to use your intuition and your heart. And I thought I was plagued by my emotions for so many. I found an old journal from college a few weeks ago, and it was like, I hate my emotions. They're so unpredictable. They're so uncontrollable. I wish I could just figure out what I'm supposed to do to be happy. And it's been a very long journey, but what I've realized is that really following my heart to make good decisions quickly, learn from them. I've made so many mistakes. I can't tell you how much money I've spent on mistakes, but I've always learned from them. And the thing that I'm sitting with now, it's been the pandemic year and the Trump administration and all of these things. But it's realizing that my feelings are indicators about dissonance in my thoughts. So if I'm feeling crappy, I can choose to think better feeling thoughts. And that's where I've gotten with mindfulness. And then from there, when I'm thinking thoughts that are making me feel good, it is so easy to take inspired action and follow my heart. And that's what the TechCrunch thing was. I was washing my hair and I was like, wouldn't it be hilarious if I could pull off a Dear Abby style advice column called Dear Sophie to help tech people with their immigration woe is me questions. And I was like, hey, TechCrunch people who I just met, do you want to do this? And they were like, yeah, that sounds cool. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Like, that's what that was.
Wow. And did you met these folks though? Like you had some contacts in there, I guess, or?
My shout out to the guy I dated from Bumble like 2 years ago for telling me that TechCrunch was doing a call for the best service providers for tech startups. And he was an entrepreneur and he was like, well, it's like, oh, he's like, you should apply. And I was like, okay. And he's like, you should get people to nominate you. And I was like, oh, I guess I could ask a few people. He's like, Sophie, you have a mailing list, don't you? I was like, yeah. And he's like, mail merge. Send the same email to everybody who's interacting with you about this and see if they'll nominate you. So I ended up getting, I think I sent the email out to like 2,000 people and over 50 or 60 nominated me to TechCrunch. So they called me and they're like, well, you're clearly the expert because 50 or 60 people nominated you. And I was like, oh, that's great. Do you guys ever need content? Because I could write stuff for you. And they're like, we need content. Yes, please. You would do that? I was like, sure. So that's how that all happened. So I had a relationship with them and then I was like, yeah, how about this, this column? They're like, okay.
That's incredible. I love it because I would be shocked if people thought that they could just walk in and get a column or get just something. And like, most people think there's a process and you got to know somebody and it's never me. I'm never good enough. But just asking, because realistically, okay, you got 50 people nominated you, but TechCrunch doesn't know you. They've never worked with you. They've never hired you. You asked, you put yourself out there and you said, here's what I want to do. Yes, there was some social proof there from the folks nominating you and it kind of worked out. I love that because I think it's such a lesson in, like you said, taking inspired action and just trying. I mean, what's the harm?
We're all people. We're all humans. And if we see each other, if we're like, oh my gosh, they're so high and mighty, why would they ever pay attention to me? That's what landed me in depression. So the thing that works now is eye level, like, hey, what can we create together? How could this benefit both of us? Let's be creative. Let's have fun.
So can we talk a little bit about, I know I want to be mindful of your time. If you can stick around for a couple extra minutes.
I can. Let me just, okay. Yes. Let me just do something real quick, but let's keep talking.
As you're doing that, Jody Barnhill says, Sophie, I love your courage to follow your heart and be okay with failing your way forward. You're amazing. And I agree. And it's, being okay with failure is not something that lawyers, I think, are comfortable with because, like you said, inherently we sort of, you want to put out the perfect brief or put out the perfect application. But as a law firm owner, right, you're an entrepreneur and you have to put on a little bit of a different hat. And their failure, depending on what type of quote unquote failure it is certainly okay. In fact, it's probably necessary in order to really get somewhere. I wanted to ask you, the TechCrunch column, I think that started in 2019. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I know you've also you have a podcast, Immigration law for tech startups, right? So shout out to that. If folks listening, check out that podcast as well. And that is that sort of an audio version of the kind of Dear Sophie column where you give it.
Yeah, but we have interviews, and it's often me waxing philosophical and spiritual about legal concepts and finding meaning and purpose. So it's technically like how to do an I-485 or what to know about consulates. But I think we're at episode 50 now, so I've kind of covered all the basics. I have the library for SEO purposes, and now I interviewed one of my favorite law professors. It's going to come out soon, but like the future of immigration law, how could we build a system that supports people, that, you know, takes into the collective need, takes those things into account, and supports more people. So it's fun to be able to dive into those topics. There's more futures coming on.
Do you see, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between that and Dear Sophie. Do you see yourself, or are you doing other things? I mean, you speak a lot. I've now moderated 2 panels that you've been on. You speak all the time, it looks like, right? Do you think about all of this as like, how do you think about this? And I guess I'm prefacing this question with the thought of, I have the philosophy of, if I can, right? If I have the stamina and the strength, I want to put out as much content, as much information, create as much value for people as possible, right? Yeah. I also know that there is some, I guess you could say financial benefit down the road from doing that. It's not guaranteed. Sometimes it doesn't materialize for a while, right? And so but I still enjoy the process of putting it out there. Do you have a philosophy about the way you spend your time on non-immigration law, right? i.e. these different sort of content streams that you're putting out there? And what's your philosophy behind it? And how do you make that decision for others who are listening?
Well, first of all, I would not be able to put all this content out there without my team at my firm. That's really the backbone of all of this. We, over the last year, have drilled down all of this into a procedure of, you know, we have our content calendar for the next 2 quarters. We have the outlines. I do the podcast that's turned into the TechCrunch article that then gets repurposed. So like we're using, you know, there's like the lead magnets. We're using things strategically to not be just reinventing the wheel all the time. So that's the way to make it work as a business. I personally think the firm is in great shape to really, you know, expand and continue to flourish in the Biden administration and beyond. So I love connecting with other immigration attorneys and paralegals. You know, there's wonderful ways to collaborate and support each other and grow. So this is always going to be an important part of my life. I'm also personally now very curious about, okay, what can I do with my voice? What can I do with my platform? What can I do to shape policy? What can I do to step into greater leadership roles? I had a career highlight a few weeks ago where I got asked to edit a draft bill for a member of Congress that might be announced soon. I have people from government agencies and different countries calling me to help shape their systems. And I'm like, wait, this is like the little old me that was the housewife 5 years ago that had no friends. Like, what is this? So it's really fun. And there's so much potential. And this is like the tip of the iceberg, right? Because really it's about, how do we shape the human experience so that more people can experience more freedom and more growth and more empowerment and more love and more joy? Because that's like why I practice immigration law. That's why I want there to be no borders. That's why I love helping technology professionals, because they're creating platforms that go do that out in the world. So there's this compounding, accelerating ripple effect. It's why I'm curious about artificial intelligence in tech and legal tech, and how can we use legal tech to make the client experience more human-centered? Because then lawyers could be like excellent customer service counselors who just have, you know, really great systems in the back end so they don't screw up, and then people get a wonderful experience? Like, could we reimagine the whole legal system? Could we write laws differently? So these are the things that I'm secretly passionate about.
What do you think is the future? Like, what's the future for Sophie, I guess, from a, branding, marketing experience? And I'm curious, based on that future and sort of everything that you've shared so far, what are some, maybe your top one or two things that you really would want to impart on people, especially immigration practitioners, to be as bold and as courageous with putting themselves out there?
So I'm following my heart. I'm having fun. I know that we were all so like morose and depressed under Trump. I got sick of complaining, and I just thought of more creative hacks and things that I could do to rebelliously like F with the system to help people anyway. And that gave me power and juice and excitement. And that's also led to clients, because then they're like, oh, you have this thing that could help me, right? And so I want to continue to create startups and go into venture capital and create this decision-making company, and also legal tech in the immigration field and beyond. So I have lots of projects. Podcast thing is so fun. Do I do another one that's not about immigration law? It's about like life and love and spirituality and all these other things that I'm interested in. But just looking out ahead, there's so much potential. There's so many things that are fun and exciting. And I'm so inspired now about the future. And I was the same woman who was like on the floor having panic attacks in my kitchen, wondering if I would stay alive until 5 p.m. when my kid's dad would come home. So I just know that I've been able to transform through a lot of darkness, and the world and the future and our lives and experiences are however we decide to direct our thoughts. And so, I know that I've been able to attract all of this abundance into my life and the lives of others, and it's so pleasurable. And it was not as hard as I thought it was when I didn't know what I needed to do.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's so powerful, because it's right now is a dark time for many people. And, in some cases it's sort of internal. In other cases, it's everything happening in the world, but that's still energy that we put out there. It could be nervous energy, it could be anxious energy. If we can reroute that in a way that is, if possible, I'm not saying it's easy. It by no means is easy, but if possible, to reroute even some of that energy and turn it into positivity, at least as an outlook, but maybe even further as action, is just, it's really inspiring. But you know what, Sophie, like, this is why we're talking, because it's hard to reroute that unless you know it's possible. And I think listening to you reminds us that it is possible, right? It's doable, and that there's something good on the other side. I just have a comment here from Shay Misra, says you're a great example for all female entrepreneurs, and your journey is really impressive. I love how you said you have to wear all hats, that of a lawyer and that of an entrepreneur, and look at things from a holistic lens. Kudos to you for your bravery, and for trying new things and constantly putting yourself out of your comfort zone. I almost think that that's just how we should be thinking about, when you put yourself and get out of your comfort zone, you are kind of marketing yourself, right? That is the brand that you have. You're a risk taker. You're not falling in line necessarily where you don't have to. So I feel like those things that Shay just mentioned are the things that have in part made you who you are today.
Thank you.
What would be kind of your, if I had to ask you for your top tip or top piece of advice, for folks listening, if they think to themselves, part of AILA, right? Huge chunk of AILA are small and solo firms. And it's just hard to compete. And the idea is, how do you really differentiate yourself from others?
I mean, I talked to so maybe we could close with this story. I talked to a law student who really wanted to practice immigration law, and she's passionate about indie music. And within 15 minutes, we had spun out this business plan of how she was going to go. She was going to be the O1B lawyer for indie rock musicians. Like, why do you need to know anything else? Just forget TNs, forget whatever, and just build a website that appeals with the same like beautiful art or branding or whatever that musicians are putting on their record labels. Have that be your image. Go be a groupie, hang out backstage, pass out your business card to all the international bands, you know, go live in Europe and be like, hey, if you ever want to tour in the US, like that's my specialty, right? She could have so much fun. So that's what I did. I was like, wow, I want to be a tech entrepreneur, but all I know is immigration. So just take whatever you like. It's really easy to merge it with immigration law, and then you can be super passionate about whatever you do. And
Amen.
the freaky thing is you're like, oh no, if I just do O1Bs, who will ever hire me? How will I get enough clients? Actually, you're gonna get way more clients than if you're trying to handle every like re-entry permit and whatever other little thing, and you can charge way more. And you only focus your time on people who are actually qualified, and it's so much easier because you could build a questionnaire and have a website and have a funnel, and like it's a lot simpler.
I love that. I will agree with you 1,000%. And the only thing I'll add to that is if you get to the point where you've done every O1B and there's no more opportunity for you and you want to continue to grow, that is an absolutely amazing place to be.
Right. Because then you can have all the ancillary services, and then you're like, okay, well now I'll create a rock music training program for wannabe artists who want to come to the United States.
That's right. That's right. I love it. I love that. So, you know, I think the takeaway there is find out what you're passionate about, tap into that, and actually try to take that and turn it into your law firm marketing, really your brand. And not only will you be happier doing what you're doing, you'll be more memorable, and you'll probably end up getting clients more easily because there's no one else who can do that kind of thing. It's your brand. It's in your name. That means I'm going to you. So I love that. And, you know, Sophie, I don't want to keep you anymore. Thank you so much. This has been really eye-opening. Thank you for sharing your story. Honestly, it's inspiring. And I think it just reminds us that, like, no matter how difficult, I guess, life can get, it can also get better. And sometimes through the difficulty is how it gets better, right? And, you know, if we all have to live our own challenges, that's one thing, but we can also learn from each other. So I appreciate you sharing how you got to where you are today.
So much, the world is so big. There's so much potential. We can create so much. We can support each other. We can group together. We can do an unlimited amount of things. It's not a zero-sum game. The happier we are, the bigger we make the pie for everybody. Amen.
Amen. I agree. Thank you, Sophie. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Roman. It was so much fun.
Likewise. Come back.
I love that. Okay.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks. Bye.
Oh, man. Wow. What an incredible conversation. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you again. Huge thank you to Sophie for sharing that journey and that story. Really appreciate all the comments and the questions. Keep them coming. Reach out to me, reach out to Sophie on LinkedIn. And of course, find Sophie on TechCrunch. And if you have any questions, you can always ask Sophie. So thank you all so much for joining. That's it for 2020. Taking a few weeks off, but I will see you all here on, when is it? Not January 1st, because that's also a Friday. So the Friday after that, January 8th, we'll be back. In the meantime, stay safe, happy holidays, and take care, y'all. Peace out.